it is in the interest of the United States to be friends with Russia, period. Why should we arm ourselves against whom? If the United States has already decided that Russia is a good guy.
What is the fate of Europe then?
Not very good. This is the end of NATO.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate through the link given in the description box. But the least you can do is to like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome ex-Ambassador Jose Zorrilla. Ambassador Jose Zorrilla is one of Spain's top diplomats. Ambassador Zorrilla, welcome to India and Global Left.
Hello, Yotisman. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much for inviting me to this well-known venue.
Of course, I want to continue our coverage about the evolving US-Russia relationship. I would ask you more questions about Europe, but if we could start with the larger developments in terms of top officials on the US side and Russian sides talking to each other, also the presidents talking to each other. How do you look at this evolution or rapidly changing situation?
Well, Yotis, you belong to a very, very old country, indeed. And so do I. So perhaps some history is in order. You remember that Spain had the bad idea of sending an armada to prevent England from becoming Protestant, and it failed miserably. This is true. I think it's one of the great mistakes of the Spanish administration ever. But at a given moment, there was a change of dynasty in England, and the Tudor disappeared and came the Stuarts. And now, as soon as the Stuarts reached office, they said, peace with Spain. And that was it. It's called in French, renversement des alliances. That's it. You are enemies and then you become friends. So you are friends and then you become enemies. If you remember again, a country which we are very closely linked, which is the British Empire in its days, and they were the sworn enemies of Stalin because they thought that the class enemy, which was Stalin, was at the same time the existential enemy. Only there was a person who did not believe that, Sir Winston Churchill. Fourth to the succession of the dukedom of Marlborough, a Tory to the marrow of his bones, and yet he knew to be the existential enemy of the British Empire is something, and to be the class enemy of the British Empire is a completely different story. So, when Hitler attacked England, he became friends with Stalin. That was it. And again, if you want something closer to us, you have Truman. Roosevelt and Stalin were in very good terms. Then Truman arrived and said, well, enough is enough, This has to come to an end. And they broke the link, and the Cold War started. So I think this is what is taking place right now. Finally, someone, in this case Donald Trump, has realized that enough is enough. The paradigm of hostility has to come to an end because, they achieved nothing. Complete disaster, reputation, blood, capital, whatever. And besides that, it's unsustainable. Because every year, it's unbelievable, but every year they had something like 3 trillion in deficit. Besides not attaining any of the strategic goals of this hostility, Besides, it was unsustainable because it cost much more money than they had. So they finally, Donald Trump said, well, enough is enough. So peace takes over hostility. Grim visage war is over. Fair peace will do. And this is the situation right now. It's a very important change of paradigm because think that since 1990, in which the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States was all the time pushing, 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 staging coup after coup. It's almost monotonous. It's repeat it all over again without doing nothing. All bot operations. It's incredible. I think finally they have come to realize that we don't need Greenland. If we are friends with Russia, we buy rare earth or rare minerals from them. That's it. If we need aluminium, iron, whatever, we buy it from Russia. There is no need to stage coups in the improbable hope that sooner or later Russia shall collapse and disappear, or will become 9 or 10 different little countries. This is what I think Mrs. Callas would like our foreign minister, so to speak, our European Union lady Pesk, so in charge of foreign affairs. This is the wet dream. Her wet dream is more or less that, which I think is crazy, quite frankly. Yeah.
Let's drill down a little bit on that, the several wet dreams, because the finance ministers of the Nordic Baltic states collectively yesterday wrote an article in the Financial Times. I'm not sure if you have seen it. I mean, there is not much in it, but they are just reiterating it as late as yesterday, that them as a bloc being the second largest funder of military equipments to Ukraine after the United States, they should continue doing that. And it must be brought to our notice of our viewers that NATO is a big element to this conflict. I mean, it began like in the late 1990s, in 1999, with the expansion of NATO to Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. And then in 2004, another trends with Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Bulgaria. And then I think the final kind of nail in the coffin was in 2008 with Georgia and Ukraine talks starting, and that has been going on. So, if you could tell us the divisions within Europe, the divisions between the diplomats and the officials, different countries, the Nordic Baltic versus others, that would be really helpful because you know Europe better than many others.
But to begin with, we have the traditional enmity between the Brits and the Russians, to begin with. That's number one. You remember the Crimean War, that in terms of civilization prevented Constantinople from becoming Christian again. No calms, no problems. They did it. And then again, they repeated or tried to repeat something similar after the Second World War. You should remember that the President Truman, at the time not yet the president of the country, simply a congressman, said 20 million dead in the Soviet Union are not enough. So in the English-speaking world, there is a kind of permanent hostility against Russia. And most terrible of all is the union between Russia and Germany. This is the origin of everything. So we have an most excellent book written by Mary Sarot, and she explains that in 1990 there was a meeting, and with Baker. James Baker was the head of the delegation, the American delegation, and James Baker more or less agreed with Russia with Soviet Union and Germany should agree for the reunification of Germany. And Robert Selig, which later on would become the president of the World Bank, phoned the White House and said, guys, if this works, NATO is going to be blown. This is the end of NATO. And then Bush's father said, no, 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 never, never, stop it. And this, this brings us to the big strategic question of Eurasia. Should we, all of us, rest on the union between Germany and Russia, as Bismarck did in the 19th century? Or should we have a wedge between Germany and Russia in the form of NATO? Now, this second option was the one chosen by the United States. A lot of people said that that was a terrible mistake. Among others, the legendary diplomat George F. Kennan. He said, this is going to bring havoc, to our international relations. And definitely Russia will end up by doing something bad. And then all those who advise us to enlarge NATO will say, you see, the Russians are bad guys. We already told you, and they won't be right. Now, in the end, the old strategic idea defended by British imperialism in the person of Sir Harford Mackinder won. And I think all this has come finally to a disastrous end in the war in Ukraine, an unnecessary war, an unnecessary war. Ukraine was a bridge between the East and the West. And the strategic idea of the United States was to turn it into a fortress against Russia. And I'm afraid this has cost a lot of casualties, a lot of money, a lot of capital, a lot of blood. And in the end, Ukraine has lost the war, and with it, NATO and the United States. Now, as to the different positions in Europe, I can tell you, England is against Russia, Poland is against Russia, the Baltic countries are against Russia, but Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, quite frankly, we are not afraid of Russia. Germany is a different story, because Germany originally was absolutely, resolutely in favor of the friendship with Russia. But after all, Germany is a defeated country. We shouldn't forget that. It's very powerful, an excellent economy, a powerhouse, but at the same time, a defeated country. Very important in this, the sense of guilt. Guilt, in the case of Germany, is not a moral question. It's a political question. Have you ever heard Belgium apologizing for the genocide that committed in Congo? Never. Never. Well, they kill more people than the Germans in the Holocaust, which is a lot to say. But the defining moment in the history of Germany is not the Holocaust. This is what the United States wants, to keep the defeat going on. And as long as Germany remains inside the cage of guilt, no Europe is possible. I think the United States knows it only too well. Now, if Germany cannot buy oil and gas from Russia, the only outcome is ruin. And now comes the second, how does this call in German, in mathematics, is the second variable, which is the Americans said first the war and then the sanctions will destroy, finally, will bring a regime change in Russia. But no, that didn't happen. What happened was that our allies, or the European allies, suffer from the sanctions, but not Germany. Partially because of you, Jyotish, because of you and because of China, Just no sanctions, no. So the philosophy of sanctions collapsed. And in the end, it's completely botched story, it's the opposite. So we tried to wound Russia, but in the end, we wound our allies without, damaging the prospects and the future of Russia. Now, the question is very, very serious, because according to the World Bank, Russia, the sanction power, instead of being the fifth country in the world, right now in the ranking order of the countries is the fourth. Difficult to believe. As to Poland, I have a very special message for Poland. They suffer a lot, and I would like to be very sensitive when discussing the issue, but dear Polish friends, Russophobia is unstable if you have behind a hegemon that backs you. But if you do not have behind a hegemon backing your Russophobia, you are done for. They bet a lot on their Russophobia because they were convinced that they will always have the United States on their side. Now the moment has come in which the United States has done, the renversement des alliances and has said, no, peace and not war. And then Poland, instead of being a friend, becomes an enemy. Russia, instead of being an enemy, becomes a friend. I don't know if this is too complex for the common man, Jyotish, but anyway, you are not a common man, but perhaps the people who are listening to us are a bit confused for all this friendship and enmity and the like. But there is a very good compass to understand all this. Jyotish, in strategy, there are no morals. There are only interests. Study the question under the, general principle of interest, everything finds its right place. Don't forget it. Interest. It is in the interest of the United States to be friends with Russia, period. Finally, Donald Trump has understood that it is better peace than war. And of course, all this is a complete change of paradigm. Yes, true. But what can we do? When it comes to Europe, I left aside a very special part of Europe, which are the countries definitely in favor of Russia, say Serbia, the old Yugoslavia, and now Romania. And what else do we have? Someone? No, I think Meloni is in doubt. But she's very close to Trump, so I guess that she's more or less on the side of Russia. But those definitely in favor of Russia are Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Romania. But Romania is a problem because they chose a pro-Russian candidate, and well, he's in prison now. What is more unbelievable is that an ex-minister of the United Europe, Thierry Breton, has said that, well, we prevented a Russian candidate from winning the elections in Romania, and we are ready to do the same in Germany if need be. I think this is more or less the answer to your question.
I guess I want to ask you, given all these divisions, the how the UK or Poland or the Baltic states or the Nordic states would be extremely Russia hawk, and then there are countries that you mentioned, France, Italy, Spain, who not care as much, and then Germany is a complicated problem because there are many in Germany who have been for a very long time very, very pro-Russia, including its industrial class, which needs a lot of raw materials and gas from Germany, and also part of the financial class who invests in Russia. What is the future of Europe as a bloc? Because what seems to me is that the disruption that the United States has now created, which has been for a very long time a kind of a glue for a very artificial entity in some ways, is falling apart. And they are also saying that we would negotiate with countries on one-on-one basis. We don't know what this European Union is. And finally, the European Union's whatever legitimacy it had in the post-war reconstruction, that was falling apart economically in the neoliberal years. Because if you look at the comparative growth, even with the United States, the growth in the neoliberal years in the European Union was much slower. Europe had gained a lot during the immediate post-war reconstruction. But from the 90s onwards, it slowed down. A lot of its major economies are in recession. That has led to a crisis from within already. And now the United States is saying that we are disrupting it even further. What is the fate of Europe then?
Not very good. And you have not mentioned the political aspect of all this, internal aspect in every country. Take Germany, which is the heart of Europe. Now, it's clear that the policy of the United States concerning up to now, up to Donald Trump, from now on, we don't know. Up to Donald Trump, the principle of hostility erupted finally in a war, and the systemic parties, right and left, agreed with the ruin of the country because they wanted to sanction, in fact, Russia. And then Germany relapsed into recession. They have been the past 3 or 4 years in recession. Good. Now, obviously, the citizens of Germany would like this situation to change. They can't. So they start voting left, extreme left, and extreme right. So they are heading towards a very serious internal problem. The policy of the United States, at least based upon hostility, is it's really a wedge, not one, but many different wedges everywhere in Europe. And the final result is not, quite frankly, is not very, I'm not very optimistic. Besides, what you say about our statistics is absolutely right. We will have to do something concerning this Leviathan that we have in Brussels, but seems very difficult or impossible. So it is possible. I'm beginning to see that the unthinkable may happen, and the unthinkable is that the collapse and final demise of the European dream. Not impossible, not impossible. And the heart of all this definitely is the relation between Germany and Russia, because historically speaking, the Germans know very well, every time they were together or were friends with Russia, things work. Bismarck 1 and 2. Whenever they were against, well, look what happened in the First and the Great War and in the Second. And look, in the interwar period, Rapallo, which was very good for both countries. So every time they are together, it works. Every time they are not together, war follows. In fact, Bismarck, it's a famous quote: peace in Europe, a treaty with Russia. This is something that the Americans didn't want. Now, I don't know if perhaps we still have time to mend fences and create a new Russia-German alliance or not. This is open to debate. But if not, I think in the medium term, the demise of the European Union is inevitable. And I don't know to whom does it benefit. In Latin, qui prodest.
Yeah, that was my precisely my follow-up. Like, what are your thoughts about the demise? Because like one way to look at the European Union is this beginning of a cartel starting with coal and steel, and then going further into monetary union, custom union, and gradually finance became more mobile and so on and so forth. And on the left in particular, we view that as a negative development, and there can be some positive, at least one can hope, coming out of the collapse. But on the other hand, people also talk about the integration of labor market, free movement of people across Europe, wars internally coming down, spread of liberal values and so on and so forth. So it seems to me were like both positive and negative sides to the so-called European Union. And I wonder what your thoughts are about, or concerns or hopes about this demise of European Union, if at all.
Well, I know that, you are Indian. You're someone from the East. You see things on a different perspective. Not that it is a bad idea. I think Kishore Mahbubani is one of my strategists of reference. It's a welcome addenda to our strategy, Eurocentric. I think it's a great idea to have someone from the outside. But what we wanted to achieve in Europe was based upon a strange economic tenet, which was compassionate capitalism, if that is possible. So you pay taxes, and it was very much influenced by the Catholic Church. But that was possible at the time under the conditions of the time, of the century. But as liberalism began to erode the basis of this system, I think the situation in Europe began to deteriorate. That's the problem. Probably it was possible in the past, this compassionate capitalism, social democracy, and the like. Now, if it is not possible, then my prophecy is that things are going to get the way is going to be very hard and very rough. When the going get tough, the tough get going. So it's not a good prophecy. It's not a nice, overview when it comes to the future. What is your landscape? The future landscape is not very promising. And besides, to be honest, and I don't want to offend anybody, but the intellectual and institutional level of our political class is quite frankly pathetic. Pathetic.
I wanted to ask.
Come on.
Sorry, go on.
The challenge is terrible. The challenge is very difficult and of historical nature. And we would need great statesmen to face this situation, like FDR was in the United States in the 30s, like Churchill was in his days. And quite frankly, we don't have this. We had in the past very conservative people like Adenauer, but with very clear ideas, or De Gaulle. Again, a very special person, but he had this intellectual standing. This, in our case, is unheard of. There's nothing of the kind, not even remotely similar. Look, Madame Callas saying that if Putin loses the war, that will be good because Russia will split into 8 or 9 little countries. What kind of speech is this? Discourse to be maintained by a Minister of Foreign Affairs, How can she be received in Moscow? How would you receive someone in New Delhi if his strategic purpose was to split India in 8 or 9 small countries? It's absurd. This is what we have at the helm of Europe, not to mention the suspicion of corruption, which affects some people in the highest level of responsibility. So again, I'm not very optimistic. All things add to create a kind of whirlwind of not very promising results. I cannot be very optimistic, but a pessimist is an optimist, but very well informed.
Can you talk about the ongoing discussion about contribution to NATO from Europe? Because there is a lot of talks going on now, given Donald Trump and Washington has been insisting that its allies should contribute more to the collective security. And we know that there are many countries in Europe that actually sells a lot of weapons, whether it's Germany, a lot of Nordic countries, even Switzerland. I mean, France. These are major like exporters of arms. So it's not that they are incapable. Of course, their economies are in trouble, but can you talk about whether you see a collapse of NATO or whether you see that ultimately Europe would end up contributing more to NATO and NATO might get even more strengthened?
No, well, excuse me for, changing of the guard. Now, I ask you, why should we arm ourselves against whom? If the United States has already decided that Russia is a good guy.
Yeah, but that if has to be
Why should we
convinced
spend a lot of money?
through Europeans are not convinced. I mean, that's the whole
So,
problem.
of course, number two, very interesting statistic, this one. We spend in Europe 300 billion a year, which is 3 times the Russian expenditure. It doesn't add. I mean, there's no way to understand all this. The logic of this narrative is, beats me. Quite frankly, I don't understand. Now, when it comes to NATO, I sincerely hope that it disappears. The sooner, the better. NATO is not defending us from the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union has already disappeared. This is absurd. Doesn't make any sense to have there. Look what happened for trying to enlarge NATO to the last consequences. Look what happened. What happened? No, we don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people have perished as a consequence of this blind strategy. Delenda est OTAN. It has to disappear. The sooner, the better.
I want to also ask you about the element of color revolution, because I think like there are at least three elements to the provocation as far as this conflict is concerned. We have discussed the element of NATO and expansion of Europe itself, but the third element is this idea that the West uh, tries to uh, be either ignorant or intolerant about different systems of governance, and then it used that as a justification to overthrow other governments. We are talking about the color revolution, the orange revolution in 2004 in this context, funding NGOs, funding its so-called pro-democratic organizations, and that creates a lot of instabilities across the world. And Ukraine, Russia is the context we are talking about. Can you talk a little bit about the interests involved in this kind of aggressive policy of democracy promotion, and when and how would that stop?
Well, I hope it has stopped now, finally, because Trump has said it. Finally, the President of the Republic the President of the United States has acknowledged the color revolutions, and including the Maidan, are our work, our initiative, and we paid for this. This has to come to an end. This is Donald Trump said it, which is something that we are all diplomats knew. That's a fact. They started bombing Yugoslavia, and it is quite clear they themselves said it. It has nothing to do with the plight of the Kosovars. Simply, Yugoslavia doesn't want to obey to the new rules. Now that there is no Soviet Union, we rule. They don't want to, so okay, we bomb it. What? There was Moldavia. There was. They tried in Belarusia. They tried practically everywhere. In Georgia, of course, they tried in Ukraine, the Orange Revolution, and even in Kyrgyzstan, in Middle and Central Asia. And that was at the beginning. I discussed this, and I told you the color revolutions are the expression of a hostility paradigm. Finally, we want to harass Russia, and we try to destabilize the country and probably to extend. Well, the idea was this, to extend freedom and democracy to them. It's inverted commas. In fact, it's a question of power. Is this disguised under the question of democracy? But it is not true. I was ambassador in Georgia to define this as a democracy. It's ironical, to say the least. As to the Maidan, defined as, a people, a martyrdom of the guys who wanted to be belong to the West. And they were forced to remain in the shackles of Russia. Well, I can even tell you something that it is not very well known. I can say you which precise salary or reward you receive if you wanted to join the demonstrators in the Maidan. 50 hryvnias. So they give you 50 hryvnias, and you went there to scream and spend the night there. Buses ran across Ukraine, trying to find people to go there, and they were paid 50 hryvnias, as I told you. The tires were put in front of the cameras. The tires then were burned. Once the cameras disappeared, the fire was extinguished and the flat, the, fa- the tires stopped burning. So we have this incredible conversation between Victoria Nuland, number 3 of the Department of State, and Jeffrey Pyatt, Ambassador Kiev, discussing which person was going to be the next prime minister of Ukraine. How can they find this as a scream of freedom? It's a joke. It's a coup. It was a coup. They have done practically the foreign policy of the United States in this part of the world has consisted of launching coup after coup in the hope of an improbable collapse of Russia. Incredible. I saw it even, well, we all saw it. At the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, there were comments saying when the Russians begin to see there are courses coming back home in black bags, then Putin will fall. Well, I have spent 6 years in this country, believe me, this is not going to happen. And in fact, it did not happen, Russians are very tough guys. You don't mess with them, and they are very nationalistic. You don't do, if you expect them that they are going to collapse because of a war in the frontier, I'm afraid you need more than Ukraine to achieve this.
In European history, particularly history of Napoleon, it's said that there were like two vulnerable Achilles heel. One was Spain, the other was, of course, Russia, and it
Yes,
seems
yes.
to me
You
like
know why? The limits.
right.
Napoleon overextended himself. He went to Russia and went to Spain, and the center collapsed.
Yes, and I think like Ukraine is a very good example because in February 2022 they thought that they could beat Russia. I mean, and initially they were doing pretty well. Russians really entered with a very small force and with all the backing that the United States was giving, but gradually it fell apart and fell apart and fell apart, and then they lost, and now everyone admits it. Um, Ambassador Zorila, I want to end this conversation by asking you about your thoughts, advice, suggestions about the relationship between the United States and Europe going forward. You have already spoken that in terms of Russia and Europe, the hostilities have to come down, NATO should be abolished. What would be the relationship, as you see, should be going forward between Europe, so far a very subservient bloc of the United States, and the United States at the moment of this turmoil when many of European elites don't seem to have an idea about where they are going so far as their relationship with the United States is concerned.
You said it. The European elites don't know. But I would say Donald Trump doesn't know either. So we are, as you said very well, it's a kind of turmoil. Generally speaking, when you discuss war, the journalists say the situation is fluid. We don't know what is going to happen. So this is the situation. It's fluid. And well, first of all, we need to know what the United States wants to do. And then I am not, I am not very optimistic concerning Europe. Quite frankly, we are not up to the task that we have to conduct and develop. We don't have the political class necessary for this serious, important endeavor. And I'm not very optimistic when it comes to the possible consequences of all this turmoil. No, I cannot, I cannot be optimistic. I'm sorry. But if you wish, perhaps, perhaps, Jyotish, in a year or so, if you ask me again, the situation will be more, a bit less dark, so to speak, because right now, Donald Trump, has just arrived, and the dust has not settled yet. The dust is up in the air. It has not settled. We need some time to see what happens. But definitely, the consequences are going to be important because imagine the United States giving up the notion of customs duty, simply because they can buy it and get it from Russia. So they are planning, Donald Trump was planning to put customs on aluminum. But now they are planning to invest 15 billion in an aluminum plant in Krasnodar. So if Russia is open for business, Greenland is not necessary. Canada is not necessary. Aluminium, customs duties, everything. Why? The Arctic, Greenland, the famous story of Greenland. If you have Russia with you, you are friends with Russia, there's no need for Greenland. You want to go to the Arctic. You're most welcome. What do you want? To cross the Arctic? Cross it. Simple. You need gas from us? You get it. You want rare minerals? Get them. No problem. It is a question of seeing how the situation develops. And right now, I think it's premature. Yet, if you wish, I give you appointment, an appointment. You say within 1 year we speak all over again and see what happens.
Yeah, and I must also add, it's not just Russia; it's even Ukraine. It seems that they're forced into agreeing with the so-called mineral agreements, like that might include like lithium, graphite, cobalt, titanium, including oil and natural gas. Of course, like there's things that are quite open-ended in terms of whether that fund would be $500 billion or not. But I think the Ukrainians are pretty much going along that some kind of joint agreement would would come through, and I don't know like how much of that would benefit the Americans in general, but American corporations definitely would get all the minerals from both Russia and Ukraine, while the European elites seem to be like just staring at blank without having any idea, still talking about defeating Russia. That's my view.
No, mine too. By the way, we absolutely agree. Absolutely. Now, a little secret, Jyotish. Most of these minerals are in land occupied by Russia in the Donbass, which incidentally, Russia said over and again that it was not in their interest to have this land. This is why there was an agreement in peace. Right? They signed a peace treaty. Yeah. No, I don't know if are you familiar with this? In Istanbul,
Yeah, the Istanbul didn't have a lot of talks about this territory. It was mostly about
they
NATO. Yeah.
They signed the peace treatment, they signed the peace agreement with initials. And Biden said, no NATO, no peace. Simple. Now, from the very beginning, Russia was not interested in the Donbass. So right now, all right, do you want the minerals that are in the Donbass? Are yours for the asking? Well, modest price, you will have to pay for it. But apart from that, be my guest. This is the situation. So we are, the friendship between Russia and the United States can have impressive consequences on the world order. Impressive, impressive. I think unforeseen. We still don't know what may happen. But definitely, in my opinion, very, very positive outcome. Finally, Giotis, don't forget it. Peace is better than war. Definitely, always. The greatest, the summit of satisfaction for a hegemonic power is peace. Pax Britannica, Pax Hispanica, Pax Americana, Pax Romanova. If you go to Rome, which I advise you to do, there is a monument in the center of the city, which was erected by no less than Octavian Augustus himself to peace, because he went to Spain, fought the tribes of the north, and the gates of the Temple of June finally were closed. And he created this very beautiful monument to peace, Ara Pacis, the altar of peace, which is there, is heritage of mankind, and again, peace is the fruit of very good administration and above all the ambition of all great hegemon powers. I hope they can, both of them, find an agreement on this super value of all political life, which is concord and agreement, peace in the end.
Well, on that balanced note of US Russia optimism and European pessimism, we'll leave it there. But Ambassador Zorilla, thank you so much for your time. And the instability and uncertainty would mean that we would have more occasions to have you on and discuss more about this and also about Spain, which today we didn't discuss, but certainly is one of our interests. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jyotish. Thank you very much. To you.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. The last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.